Welcome to another edition of Echoes of Freedom. I'm your host, Brandon Crosby. Today I have Mr. Bob Ford, who was part of the 525th Division of the Vietnam War. Thank you for joining us, Mr. Ford.
My pleasure. Thanks for asking.
Please tell us a little bit about your background and your decision to join the armed forces.
I was born in Union County, New Jersey. Born in Elizabeth, raised in Roselle, went to Catholic grammar school, Catholic high school, Catholic college. My family was poor. Normally when I say that, people say, oh yeah, right. Well, a good example of explaining how we were poor is I did not know that everybody didn't put cardboard into their shoes when they had a hole in their shoe, because we couldn't afford to get new shoes all the time. But we always had clean clothes, we always had food, and we didn't know that we were poor. When I went to college, I wanted to go to college at Scranton University and play basketball. When I had an interview at Scranton, they said, you're not a good student. I said, gee, thanks a lot for sharing. And the admissions director said, you have higher grades in humanities type classes than you do in math, but your SAT scores were higher in math than they are in liberal arts type classes. You don't study. You're not a good student. Go find out how to be a student and come back. So I was going to just join the Army. This was in 1966, before things really fired up in Vietnam. Okay. And my mother was the one that went ballistic and said, no, go to St. Leo College in Florida. So I applied and got accepted at St. Leo College in Florida. And first semester I made the dean's list, second semester I made the dean's list, third semester I pledged to fraternity. I didn't make the dean's list that semester. Then my second semester, sophomore year, I had a biology class taught by a Catholic priest. Right before the semester started, they informed him that he was being sent to Africa as a missionary. He didn't want to go to Africa. He got mad, so he failed the entire biology class. Mm. There was a big survey class. There was about 80 guys in the class. Everybody failed. The school notified the draft boards that we were on academic probation. My draft board was drafting me in Elizabeth. On Friday, this is true, Friday, August 6, 1968, I called the draft board. I says, I've got to talk to somebody. There's been a mistake. He said, what kind of mistake? What are you talking about? I said, I'm a college student. I have a 2S deferment, but I received a 1A in the mail. What's your number? What number? The number on the top of your draft card. What's the number? So I read the number. They said, no, there's no mistake. Your number's on the board. I don't know what you're talking about. What board? We put the numbers on the board of everybody being sent a notice at the beginning of the month. Your number's on the board, you're going to get a notice to report. I said, but you don't understand, I'm a college student. No, son, you don't understand. You were a college student. No, but you don't understand, I'm going back to college. No, son, you're going in the Army. But you don't understand. No, son, you don't understand. We went back and forth for a little bit until finally this grade 3 clerk said, listen, you're going to get a letter in the mail. It's going to tell you to report to the federal building in Newark. You report that day, we're going to send out MPs to arrest you. Well, I didn't think I enjoyed that conversation too much, but Monday I went to see a recruiters, and there was a waiting line to get into the Air Force, a waiting line to get into the Navy. There's a waiting line for everything except the Marine Corps and the Army. And I did not want to go in the infantry. I already had friends came home in pieces, and I didn't want to get shot up, I didn't want to get killed, and I didn't want to come home in pieces. So I went to see the Army recruiter. I explained this to him, and he said, listen, you're going to get drafted anyway, right? I said, yes. He says, well, you can take the test, the entrance test, you can take the physical, and if you don't pass, you're not going in, no matter what. If you do pass, you can still wait and be drafted, or you can make a selection of what you want to do in the Army. You can make a choice. I said, okay, that's a lose-lose, but okay. So I went and took the physical, and I passed. I went and took the test, and I scored really high. And I go back to see the recruiter. He says, you can have anything you want. I says, I don't know what you have. So he starts reading out of a 3-ring binder, and I was bored to tears. I said, listen, I'll go wait and be drafted. And then he said, well, all that's left is Army intelligence. I said, what? He says, Army intelligence. I said, well, what's that? And he actually did this. He says, well, we don't know that much. The only ones that know anything are the ones that go through training, and they can't. He actually did that. And I'm like a fish on the hook. He said, now, you go through training and you do background investigations, you work out of the federal building. You mean I could live at home and work here in the federal building? You could. I was like Private Benjamin. I could be in the other army, you know? I said, wow, I like that idea. So I enlisted for Army Intelligence, the oxymoron. And I went through basic training at Fort Dix. I went in the Army on Friday the 13th of September, 1968. Went to basic training at Fort Dix. Went from here's another thing. Everybody says, no matter what your training is, no matter what you sign up for, your very first job in the Army is infantry. Remember, even the cooks at Bastogne were on the line in the infantry. So that's your very first job, so learn your job. Right. So right away, I'm scared that they're going to cheat me. So I learned, and I never fired a weapon before, never fired a bow and arrow, never even fired anything. First day on the firing line, I put 3 bullets in the same hole. And they were yelling at me because I was supposed to fire 3 rounds, and it didn't look like I fired 3 rounds. And they start screaming at the guy alongside of me that's spotting me, and he said, he did fire 3 shots. So he says, do it again. So I did it again. He said, do it again. I did it again. I did not know enough how to do it wrong. I only knew, and I was too afraid to do anything other than what they told me. So I did it again. I always fired a perfect score every time I fired. They actually asked me if I wanted to be a sniper. I said, no, there's no snipers in Army Intelligence, and I'm in Army Intelligence. Okay. After we got to basic training, the first week they give you uniforms, they give you haircuts, they give you retesting. Well, I took all the tests again. And I scored even higher than I did before I went in the Army. Before I went in the Army, I was not yet 21 years old. I had not graduated college, so I was not allowed to take the officer's candidate test. After I was in the Army in basic training, they gave me the officer's candidate test again. I maxed the test. So during basic training, my company commander called me into his office and asked me if I wanted to convert and go to officer's candidate school. He explained that there's no intelligence officer's candidate school, there's only infantry officer's candidate school. I said, no. He wasn't happy about it, but I did not want to go into infantry. So out of basic training, I graduated in the top 10%, and I got a promotion with 1 stripe. Then I went to Fort Halliburton, Maryland, the intelligence school. There, the company commander and the first sergeant found out that I was a platoon, a trainee platoon guide, trainee NCO for basic training. So they made me in charge as an acting corporal, in charge of 50 guys in my class that were all under 21 years old, and all of us were going to be going to Vietnam, and he thought that this was a good idea. So needless to say, we were in trouble every day. We were cleaning latrines and barracks floors every day. Couldn't wait to get out of there, but I ended up going straight to Vietnam. The good news was I did go to the 525th Military Intelligence Group, and I did get to work in an office. And I'm thinking to myself, I'm going to live. This is good. All right? 2 weeks after I got there, the guys I went with all went home. Or the guys I went with replaced the guys who all went home. So I got called into the first sergeant's office. And the guy in front of me was a little bit taller than me. He flunked out of the University of South Carolina. He played basketball. He was taller than me. They gave him a radio. It's called PRC-25, and told him to wait on the side. I step up. He hands me an M60 machine gun. I look at this thing. I said, First Sergeant, what's this? He says, that's an M60 machine gun. I said, Top, what do I do with it? He says, you make it work. I said, Top, how do I make it work? He said, I don't know. I've never seen one before. I've been in Germany my whole career. I said, well, what am I supposed to do? He reaches behind him, grabs an Army manual on the M60 machine gun. He says, here, everything you wanted to know about the M60 machine gun. So I learned how to work an M60 machine gun out of a book. I took it apart, put it back together again, cleaned it, everything else, and then practice and practice and practice. I got to practice so much that I was so good, I got to be an instructor. Yay me. But also, the reason this happened was because we got volunteered into a reaction force. All around the Saigon headquarters area command in Vietnam, there was about 20 or 30 different units that had, they were clerks and jerks, personnel clerks, finance clerks, administrative types that had to provide a platoon to protect the Saigon area command. Our platoon was assigned to protect the embassy hotel. The U.S. Embassy was protected by Marines. The Embassy Hotel, where the dignitaries came and stayed, that was protected by MPs and us. If it was attacked, we responded. There was Armed Forces radio TV station. Anytime, anywhere, there's a coup anywhere in the world, they attack the radio and TV stations to get control of those facilities, to announce to the populace what is going on. That was one of our targets to protect. There was also several bridges around the Saigon area. One of the bridges had a water main underneath it that had 80% of Saigon's drinking water going through it. Another one had a power main underneath the bridge with almost all of Saigon's electrical power going through it. These were also our targets. There was the main highway between Saigon and Bien Hoa was Route 1, and there was a bridge. You were probably very familiar with the bridge at the Parkway at Port Republic. Well, it looks almost the same. The first time I came down here from North Jersey, the hair on the back of my neck went up. I was vibrating. It looked like I was rolling up on this bridge because it looked exactly the same without the bunkers on the side of it. Well, that was also one of our targets because it was a main thoroughfare. Every once in a while we had practice alerts where we have to assemble, ride out, get near our targets, deploy off our trucks, run up and take protective spots. More often than not, it was just practice. And every once in a while, you'd run up, jump into a bunker, start to load up the M60 machine gun, and you look in front of you, and one time there was this rat. It was as big as a dog. It was huge. I fired off a burst with the M60 machine gun, and I hit this thing and made it spin around, and it still ran away. They were that big. They were huge. Now, normally, that was the worst thing we got to face. But every once in a while, people start shooting at us. So it got a whole new adventure. And sometimes there was alerts that there was sappers, which were people coming down, dropping explosives underneath the bridge to destroy the bridge and what was ever underneath it. And we would throw concussion grenades in the water, and if anything popped up, we'd shoot it. So sometimes it was nothing. Sometimes it was a little bit scary, like a rat, and sometimes it was a little bit more adventurous. From 2 weeks before Christmas till 2 weeks after New Year's, all U.S. forces were on stand down. A lot of people are at Long Bin watching Bob Hope. Other units up near the Cambodian border, like the 1st Cavalry Division and other units, they were patrolling to make sure nobody was coming across the border. We were on patrol surrounding the Saigon area, various locations where there were reports of VC infiltration and attacks, stealing food, stealing young boys that were big enough to carry a rifle, and plundering and pillaging, and more frequently than not, attacking the women. So our job was for that 2 weeks before and 2 weeks after was patrolling around these areas to hunting for truce violators. And one time, one of the guys in my platoon said, well, by this time I was platoon sergeant. He says, Sarge, what? He said, what are we doing? He says, we're hunting for truce violators. Sarge, what? What are we? Don't ask. At the end of my first tour in Vietnam, I was going to be assigned to Fort Monroe, Virginia, Continental Army Command Headquarters, where Joint Chiefs had their offices. I was only a buck sergeant, and I was not wanting to go as a buck sergeant in an area where there was generals and colonels walking around harassing buck sergeants. Well, I extended to do a second tour in Vietnam. At the time, I was first on the list to get promoted to staff sergeant. I was literally in charge of everything an enlisted man could be in charge of. And to go from that to being used and abused was not my idea of a good time. So I went back, I extended to go back to Vietnam. I flew home, and we flew into Travis Air Force Base in San Francisco, near San Francisco. And since I was going right back, they did not issue me a uniform. They had me change into civilian clothes because they did not want me traveling in jungle fatigues. So I changed into civilian clothes. At that time, this was March of 1970. I don't know if I mentioned, I told you I went in the Army on Friday the 13th. I went to Vietnam on Friday the 13th of April, 1969.
Okay.
So this was March of 1970. Following the winter, everybody is pale. Every Caucasian has got pale white skin. I had a dark tan. Not as dark as you, but close. But to leave the 90th Replacement Battalion at Long Binh to fly home, we were required to get military, what they called military haircuts. It's called white walls. They shaved the sides of our heads and gave us a crew cut on top. So here I am with a dark tan, pure white skin on the sides, and a crew cut on top, like an Army Ranger. Everybody everywhere knew exactly where I had been. There was no question, because everybody at that time in 1970 had long hair down to their shoulders, and that was the guys. And everybody had face hair. Not me. You know, I started this after my second tour. I walked into San Francisco International. I had a flight to Kennedy. I got out of the cab, went through the door in the terminal, and as I'm walking towards the gate, some guy comes walking towards me, and I catch him out of the corner of my eye and turn and just catch his fist, hitting me in the top of the head. And he keeps on going. I turn around, I'm ready to go beat the hell out of this guy, and everybody in the terminal is laughing at me. And the guy behind the counter says, "Hey," and I turn and look, he says, "You going to Kennedy?" I said, "Yeah, the flight's boarding now, you gotta go." So obviously I didn't go to beat the hell out of this guy. Nobody in Vietnam told us or warned us what was gonna happen. Nobody at Travis Air Force Base warned us of what we were gonna be walking into. I didn't know, and my body was vibrating. I mean, I got no idea how beat red my head was, but I was really, really angry. But I got on the plane and I flew to Kennedy. By the time I was asleep in no time. Wake up at Kennedy Airport, get off the plane, and I wasn't gonna wait for a bus. I went straight to the taxi stand, and between the plane and the taxi stand, not one, not two, no less than 5 people spat at me, most of them on me. And everybody ignored it, and the ones who didn't ignore it just started laughing. They thought this was funny. I got in a taxi, I came home. The entire time I was home, my head was on a swivel. I was constantly looking for danger. I was looking for danger more when I was home than when I was in Vietnam. In Vietnam, I was a platoon sergeant with 50 guys behind me, covering me, protecting me. At home, I was alone, and I was in danger. I soon found out that no matter what happened, no matter what the circumstances, if there was a fight or any problem, the veteran was the one going to jail. And then they'd ask what happened. And that was the way it was in 1970. Walked down the street, people threw trash at you. Went to Seton Hall University with my buddy, and I was called a murdering capitalistic pig. I went to my brother's fraternity at Rutgers and Newark, and warning, danger. No, one of the girls that was at the party, I grabbed a beer, turned around, and she walked up and says, "You Pat Ford's brother?" I said, "Yes, I am." She goes, "Why didn't you die in Vietnam?" I said, "Because I was a little bit more lucky than most." Well, much to my joy, 2 of his fraternity brothers overheard her, picked her up, and threw her out the door. But that was the way it was in 1970. I couldn't wait to go back to Vietnam. I tell people that now, and they think I'm crazy. I felt safer going back to Vietnam. My flight going back to Vietnam was more comfortable, more relaxing than my flight home from Vietnam. I couldn't wait to get back there. There I felt safe and secure with my guys with me.
What was it like when you came home the second time?
Second time was a lot different. I flew in to Travis Air Force Base again, but then they took us over to Oakland Army Base where they issued uniforms. So this time I was flying in uniform. And there was a group of us flying together. So we went to the airport and a bus together. And there was no screaming thongs there to throw stuff at us. And we went relatively uneventful. And then I came home and I had an extended leave because I had obviously accrued a lot of leave time. I was being assigned to the 112th Military Intelligence Group in New Orleans, Louisiana. And there I actually was working in a federal building. And I did wear civilian clothes. However, during the time I was home, my hair, I did not get a white wall haircut the second time I came home. I threatened to cut the guy's hands off if he tried. And I got away with it. But I came home with a normal haircut the second time. And by the time I reported in New Orleans, I had long hair. It was over my ears, and I had already started growing my mustache. And so I report to the office in New Orleans. And as it turned out, one of the officers of one of the sections in Vietnam, a lieutenant colonel, was the commanding officer, now a full colonel, in the office in New Orleans. And he was expecting to see Staff Sergeant Ford, this super soldier, and I walked in, and everyone in the office wore straight leg pants, white shirts, thin ties, clean cut all the way. I walked in with long hair, a mustache, pinstripe bell-bottom pants, a brown blazer, a pastel shirt, and a paisley tie. And I walked in, and the woman behind the desk, her name was Mrs. Habney, she was the secretary. She goes, "May I help you, sir?" I said, "Yes, I'm Bob Ford. I'm here to report for duty." And I can hear the colonel, Colonel Burkett, "Sergeant Ford, get your ass in here." So he comes out to his door, and I'm walking towards his door. And he's going, "Jesus, what the hell happened to you?" I said, "Morning, sir." And immediately he calls for Mrs. Habney to get a hold of one of the other sergeants in the office, and in comes Sergeant Lawler. He says, "Sergeant Lawler, you take this miscreant and get him into some decent clothes and get him a haircut." I said, "Sir, this is the only kind of clothes I got." He said, "You put on a uniform." I said, "Yes, sir." As it turned out, my job there in the office was the NCO, that's non-commissioned officer, the sergeant in charge of the office, and like duty assignments and things like that. And so until I could get what he could term decent clothes, I wore a uniform to work every day. When I got there, I wanted to apply to go back to college, but I did not want to pay to go to St. Leo College in Florida, so I applied to Rutgers University in Newark. And as I said, my brother was a senior and the editor of school paper, and he called me up at the office. So here I am sitting in my office in New Orleans. I answer the phone, 112th MI Group, Sergeant Ford speaking, "Sir." He said, "Bob?" I said, "Pat?" He says, "Hey, how you doing?" I said, "I'm okay. How you doing?" "I'm okay. Dad said you applied to Rutgers." I said, "Yeah." He said, "You can't get in there." I said, "What do you mean I can't get in there?" He said, "You can't get into Rutgers." I said, "Why not?" I said, "I had over 1,700 on my college SATs. I was a Dean's List student. I'm a decorated veteran." He says, "That's why you can't get in there." I said, "What are you saying?" He says, "Rutgers eliminated all veteran enrollment to increase seats for other students." I said, "That's illegal." He said, "It's already happened. You can't get in there." Well, it turned out I got rejected by Rutgers. So I complained to the chancellor of the Department of Higher Education, state of New Jersey. I got a letter back that they were going to investigate Rutgers admission policies. In the meantime, they had got me admitted to Union County College in Cranford, in Union County. So I got out of the Army on September 10th. I flew home on September 11th. My course curriculum and schedule was waiting for me for Union County College. I had an 8 o'clock, a 9:30, a 4 o'clock, and a 5:30. I had nothing to do all day. Plus, there was no way to get a part-time job. Nobody hired a Vietnam veteran, not for anything. Even the jobs that I temporarily had, as soon as they found out I was a Vietnam veteran, the job was no longer available. So I had nothing to do all day but sit around and kill time. Got my homework done, but that was not all that great. Plus the students, the traditional students, the 18, 19 teeny boppers, used to enjoy taking metal folding chairs and throw them down on the stone floors and watching veterans dive underneath the tables. One time I'm underneath the table like this, and two guys walk over and says, "Hey man, were you in Vietnam?" And I had choice words for them. They said, no, man, so were we. That was when Alpha Sigma Mu, a veterans fraternity, discovered me. And I was already at the brink. I was ready to quit. I didn't need this kind of BS. I didn't know what I was going to do, but I wasn't going to do this. If it hadn't been for Alpha Sigma Mu, I never would have stayed in school. And at the time, I later learned that there was a veterans fraternity on every college campus in New Jersey, probably most of the country. And that was really what helped me stay in school. And if it hadn't been for that, I never would have had my career. Once I finished school, I went from Union County College to Montclair. And once I finished school, I went to work for IRS Criminal Investigation, initially as an investigative aide. To get that job, I had to take a test and an interview. I maxed the test. After the interview, the two special agents and the group supervisor that interviewed me had to justify in writing hiring a Vietnam veteran over a convicted felon. This is for a federal law enforcement job, and they had to justify in writing hiring a decorated veteran over a convicted felon. I did get the job, but I was told in no uncertain terms, in exactly these terms, that I was going to have to be 10 times better than anybody else just to break even. That was life in 1971, 72, 73, 74, 75. But I did eventually become a special agent, and I spent 30 years working for IRS Criminal Investigation. And I could not imagine me doing anything else for that long, my entire life. I loved my work. It was the most diversified job that you ever get anywhere. And I really, really enjoyed it. And I would not have had that had my life had been any different.
All right. There's a lot of news today about people sitting down during the flag salute. What are your thoughts on that?
As a matter of fact, when that first came out in the media, the best way I could put it, it violated my sensibilities. As I was reading it, the story, I was vibrating. But I did not want to react out of a position of anger or violation. I did not want to react out of something personal. So I waited and thought about it. And the more I thought about it, the more this trend spread. And the more it was happening in high schools and colleges and other football teams. And people and the media were focusing, and one picture was a Marine in dress blues holding the American flag during the national anthem, and they're focusing in on three guys in football uniforms right behind him. And I'm thinking, it's like, where does the media think that this is a good thing? And the more and more it happened, the more and more I felt violated. And it really became more and more difficult to reconcile any of this. I mean, here is somebody thinking that this is a way to protest what he thought was something negative about the United States government. Well then, you're a multimillionaire. You can protest the government in every way you could possibly think of. This is not the way to do it. But then this past Sunday was the straw that broke the camel's back. During the pre-football game show, NFL Today, one of the commentators remarked how Colin Kaepernick is more popular in the locker room today than he was when the 49ers won the Super Bowl. And I'm thinking to myself, what has happened with 20-somethings? I mean, all I could think about was those kids calling me a murdering capitalist pig, idiots throwing trash at me out of moving cars, people spitting at me in airports. And I never felt more violated than the entire time since then until now. And you don't see adults doing this. You see when they show people in the stands, the adults are not doing this. People are putting their hand over their heart. Veterans are saluting. It's just these 20-somethings, and most of them do not even know why they're doing it. They just think, oh, this is an attention getter. It's like doing a dance in the end zone. You didn't see Walter Payton doing a dance in the end zone. You see Walter Payton handing the football to the referee. You see the idiots, when they're losing the game, doing a dance in the end zone, or doing a dance after they make a tackle. You're getting paid millions of dollars to make a tackle and you're doing a dance? But that's one thing. Sitting down or kneeling down or holding a fist in the air during the national anthem, that violates my sensibilities. And these people are misguided. And eventually, someday in the future, they're going to realize they are misguided as much as the kids from the 60s and 70s are now realizing they were misguided. One of the things that came out in the last census, during the Vietnam War, from beginning to end, there was a total of 2,900,000 U.S. servicemen, boots on the ground, including the Brown Water Navy. They were actually in-country, boots on the ground in Vietnam. If you add those in Thailand and the Blue Water Navy offshore, there was over 3 million, but boots on the ground is 2,900,000. There's less than 800,000 of us still alive today. That's something I think these kids should think about.
Okay. If there's a young person thinking about joining the armed forces, what advice would you give them?
Very first thought is get a college degree and become an officer. That's first and foremost. I know a lot of people that are in ROTC programs, and I think that's a great idea. You get your education paid for, and you still get to have the job that you're seeking to have. There's people that are looking to join the Marine Corps because they think it's cool and look good in the uniform. I said, I'm not against you joining the Marine Corps, but think about really why you want to do this, and think about what job you want to have when you do get there. Some people want to go in the Air Force or the Navy because they believe that the technical training that they can get in the Air Force and Navy is far superior to what they can get in the other services. The training is pretty much the same, whether it be regardless of what it is you're going into. If you're going to want to be on a nuclear submarine, you're going to have to go in the Navy. That's all there is to it, you know. But if you want to fly a helicopter, the people that are training the Air Force and the Navy helicopter pilots are the same people training the Army pilots. And rank is easier to gain in the Army than it is in the other services. But if you really know what you want to do and you really have a goal, because if somebody really wants to go into the infantry and everyone will enlist in the Army to go in the infantry, then I would say do as best as you possibly can in school, learn as much as you possibly can, test as high as you possibly can, and then apply to be an Army Ranger. You'll be more highly trained. You'll be working with small team tactics and smaller teams, close teams, and your jobs are going to be more exciting, but your probabilities of survival are going to be greater. Some people want to go into the airborne just because it's a lot of fun jumping out of an airplane. It is a lot of fun jumping out of an airplane. My daughter took a jump at Cross Keys Airport, a tandem jump, and before she took her first jump, they asked me if I wanted to do a father-daughter jump. I said I'd love to, but I had my hip replaced, and if I land wrong in the end zone, you got to get a crane to get my butt off of the drop zone. And my daughter asked me, said, any last words? I said, you get in that door, you do not have to jump. It's going to be your choice. But if you jump, you're going to find out 3 things immediately. She goes, what's that? I said, first, you're going to get the greatest adrenaline rush you can possibly get in your life outside of a combat firefight. Okay. I said, secondly, I said, you're going to realize instantly that there's absolutely nothing in the world that you can't do. What's third? As soon as your boots hit the ground, you're going to want to go back up again. Right? As she jumped, we paid for a guy to jump with her with a camera, and took stills off the side of his helmet and a video off the top of his helmet. And then as she and her tandem jumper pulled, this guy kept coming down, so he would be on the ground first. So he's on the ground videoing her coming in, and as she's coming in, it was almost obscene. She's riding in, she's going, yes, yes, yes. I said, Brittany, will you shut up? So as she got on the ground, the guy, the videographer, he goes, Brittany, how was that? She goes, oh, that was crazy. You want to go again? Yeah, now. Well, it turned out the next flight was already booked by a whole group of women that took independent tandem jumps, loved it so much they took training, and now they were all part of a club, an all-girl jump club, and they all had color-coordinated jumpsuits and parachutes. So I would tell anybody, you want to go jump? Go jump. Go do a tandem jump. If you can do a tandem jump, you're going to be hooked. And as far as going into the service, first and foremost, get your degree if you can. Go to college, get a degree, become an officer.
Camera 1, so you're going to be saying like the ending?
Yes.
Wow, covered everything. Does this interfere with your cameras?
No, because it's only going to be, you guys are just going to be looking at this one right now.
Okay.
So it's fine. You can take it off of the.
Oh, okay. All right. Is it okay if I read off this?
Yeah, just as
But
long as
actually-
it, like what you've been doing earlier where you're reading it and then like looking
Okay.
into the camera.
All right.
You want to take a second? Do you want to do a run through real quick?
Sure.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Ford, for talking to us today and for your service for our country. The Vietnam War was a conflict that taught us a lot about who we were as a country. Many of the men and women that served in the war are still with us today, and their stories are important to our nation and should never be forgotten. For Echoes of Freedom, I'm Brandon Crosby. I was shaking.
That was good. All right, let's do it again. 3, 2, 1, action.
Thank you, Mr. Ford, for talking to us today and for your service for our country. The Vietnam War was a conflict that taught us a lot about who we are as a country. Many of the men and women that served in that war are still with us today. Their stories are important to our nation and should never be forgotten. For Echoes of Freedom, I'm Brandon Crosby.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you for coming.